Have you ever stepped into a home that looks great and thought to yourself, what are they doing that I'm not? When this happens, it's usually because you're making one of 5 common interior design mistakes. So today, I'm going to show you what those 5 mistakes are. I'm going to show you how to fix each of them to make your home look and feel like a high-end hotel. And at the end, I'm going to show you a unique framework I've developed that can take any room and turn it into a cozy, inviting space you actually want to spend time in. So the first mistake people make is playing it too safe with color, which ends up making your space feel lifeless. Because look, when everything in a kitchen is white walls, white cabinets, white counters, the room feels sterile, almost like a laboratory. All the surfaces melt together into one continuous plane, so there's no warmth and no visual interest. And instead of feeling fresh, the space just feels unfinished, like no one has really moved in yet. But even something as simple as a wooden cutting board, a colorful backsplash, or some kind of textured tile would instantly ground the room and give it a sense of life. And the exact same thing happens in living rooms that are entirely beige and gray. When the sofa, rug, and walls all sit in that same color range, your eye has nowhere to rest. And so what's meant to feel minimalist ends up feeling flat and dull. But adding contrast through darker wood, textured fabrics, or even a single bold accent piece would give this space so much more depth. Now, if you've got a white sofa surrounded by white walls, again, it just looks unfinished, and adding in a throw pillow for contrast just feels like an afterthought. And so the lack of variation makes the room feel cold and not cozy at all. But if you mix in texture, whether that's through a natural wooden table or something even more substantial, that would start to change how the room feels. Of course, ideally, both the couch and the floors would change here to make the space feel more alive, because right now it looks like you're living in an episode of Severance. And covering your entire apartment in cream from top to bottom just makes it feel washed out, because when the walls, cabinets, and curtains all blend together, the room loses its sense of dimension. And while the palette might feel calm, without a darker anchor, it just becomes bland. I mean, just notice how much this black picture frame stands out here because it's the only dark thing in the room. So a deeper toned dining table or even a strong curtain panel would instantly give the space more visual interest, but right now it's just blah. So here's the fix. Let your furniture do the heavy lifting. In this living room, the walls are neutral and light, but the room still feels warm because the furniture has some color. The green upholstery on the sofa gives the space an identity and keeps it from feeling washed out, and the earth tone pillows soften out that green and make the seating area feel more inviting. The plants reinforce that same green color family and introduce some organic texture, while the wooden sideboard and the dining chairs inject some additional warmth so the room doesn't feel flat or sterile. And the result is a space that feels really well put together without relying on colored walls to do the work. And this room here might be an even better example because the rust-colored sofa plays the same role, but in a bolder, even more expressive way. And that warm tone becomes the focal point and instantly lifts the mood of the room, especially against the light walls and floor. And then all the colorful accents layered on top, like the pillows and the chair next to the couch, they add some variation without competing with the sofa itself. And so the mix of greenery, wood furniture, and the simple shapes keeps the room balanced so the color feels right at home. And because all of the personality is carried by the furniture, the space still feels flexible, and you could completely change the mood of the room later on just by adjusting the textiles or swapping out a single piece without needing to repaint or redo the entire room. But of course, you have other options here as well. For example, you could paint the wall behind the couch a deep shade of eggplant or blue to give the room a really striking look like you see here. And when you paint the entire back wall a deep saturated color like this, the wall itself becomes an architectural element. It pulls the wall forward and gives the room a sense of depth in a way that a neutral wall just can't. And now the sofa pops even harder because it's set against such a dark backdrop. And that contrast is what makes the whole room work so well. But what's important here is that the blue isn't bright or loud. It's muted and heavy, which keeps it feeling grown up and timeless instead of trendy. And it's that depth that lets the plants read greener, the wood tones feel warmer, and the lighter furniture and artwork stand out without screaming for attention. Or if you want to go super bold, you could go with wallpaper, and I think this one is an incredible pick. But let me be clear, the wallpaper here is doing the same job as the blue wall. It's giving the room a visual center of gravity. And in this case, you wouldn't want to go with a sofa or chair that's any louder than those you have here, because the wallpaper is already telling its own story. But what makes this setup so powerful is that the color and pattern of the wallpaper echoes what's already in the room. The deep greens tied directly into the plants, the warm tones connect to the sofa and the wood on the chair, and so nothing feels random about it. But you can also do something a little more subtle here that also works with this room. This wallpaper here keeps the same green and earthy tones that's already present in the furniture and plants, but because the colors are softer and more washed out, it doesn't demand your attention the moment you walk into the room. It still adds depth and character to the wall, but it doesn't compete with the sofa or try to be the main event. And the upside of this approach is flexibility. Because the pattern and contrast are restrained, you're not locking yourself into a specific look. So you can change the sofa, swap out chairs, or adjust any of the textiles over time, and the wall will still make sense. So it gives the room a finished, layered feel that still leaves plenty of room for the furniture to evolve. And now I want to show you a handful of other options here as well, because all of these wallpaper images I'm showing you came straight out of the wallpaper tool I built with zero edits whatsoever, which I think is pretty cool, because to come up with these designs on your own could easily take you hours if you ever get there at all. So if you want to be able to visualize your own home like this with top tier finishes that push you to think bigger about what's possible for your home, this tool is the way to do it. You just upload a photo and get back all sorts of different concepts to see how your home would look with different designs. So if that's something that's interesting to you, the link is in the description. Now, this one instantly makes the room feel quieter. It has that old house with thick walls kind of feeling, like a place that stays cool even on a hot day. And there's something a bit European and a bit old world about it, almost like a study or a salon rather than a casual living room. So it's calming, but in a serious way. You sit down here and slow down without really noticing it happening. And so in my view, this is the kind of wallpaper that makes a room feel established, as if it's been this way for years and doesn't need explaining. But then this one feels easy and lived in. It has that relaxed, slightly romantic energy that you get in older apartments that get great daylight. You know, the kind of place where nothing feels too precious. It's cheerful without being loud, and it doesn't try to be the star of the room. And so the vibe here is comfortable, soft, and familiar, almost like a well-kept guest room in a countryside home. And you could imagine this space changing over time and the wallpaper just quietly keeping up. Now, this one feels very composed and thoughtful. And there's a sense of order here that makes the room feel calm, like everything has its place. And it's got a bit of a historic vibe, not in a museum kind of way, but more like a classic European interior that values symmetry and restraint. And the wallpaper gives the room a sense of structure without feeling stiff, which makes the space feel confident and settled rather than decorative. Now, this one here immediately brings in warmth and personality. It's got that strong Mediterranean energy. It's sunny, expressive, and a little bit playful. And it feels like a room that gets used a lot, where people sit and talk and don't worry too much about perfection. And so even though it's bold, it still feels welcoming rather than overwhelming. And it makes the room feel social, like a place you'd naturally gather instead of just pass through. Now, this one here feels elegant and a little romantic, but not in a flashy way. It has that faded, grand feeling you get in older European homes where things aren't pristine, but that's exactly what makes them beautiful. The room suddenly feels more dressed, like it's leaning into tradition without becoming overly formal. And in my view, it creates a palpable sense of quiet luxury. But this one here completely changes how the room feels. And it makes the space feel deeper and more atmospheric, almost like the wall is opening up instead of stopping you. And it's got this contemplative quality to it. It's very peaceful and very slow. And it feels like a room meant for early mornings and quiet evenings rather than for constant activity. And so the energy is gentle and reflective, and it encourages the room to feel less cluttered and more balanced. And continuing on with these really captivating natural landscapes, this one is just pure escape. It instantly gives the room that vacation-like feeling, but still in a grown-up way. There's a sense of warmth, lushness and life here, almost like bringing the outdoors inside. And it feels expressive and confident, like a space that doesn't mind making a statement. But because the furniture stays grounded, it never feels chaotic. So this is a wallpaper version of saying, yes, this room has personality and it's meant to be enjoyed. But now that I've talked a lot about wallpaper, let's move on to the second mistake you need to avoid making in your home, which is investing in the wrong pieces of furniture. For example, acrylic chairs look trendy, but they feel unforgiving. They scratch and they squeak easily, and once you actually sit, there's hardly any comfort or support. And so what looks sleek in a photo ends up feeling stiff in real life. And that supposed timeless look fades really fast because they feel cheap and temporary. And so you end up replacing them sooner than you need to, which ends up costing you more in the long run, rather than just buying a quality piece from the beginning. And similarly, acrylic desks photograph well, but they also don't make any sense for real life. Every fingerprint, smudge, and scratch shows clearly, and so they almost never look clean, and the lightweight design of them feels flimsy, and they're always at risk of cracking. And so they also strip a workspace of warmth and turn it into something staged instead of something practical. And so it's style-first furniture that doesn't survive real life, and I can't recommend it at all. In a similar vein, minimalist metal bar stools look sleek, but they feel cold and hard. They're uncomfortable if you sit on them for more than about 5 minutes, and so they're just more decorative than they are useful. Plus, their thin seats don't really support you, so they very quickly become filler furniture rather than something you actively look forward to sitting on. And these super trendy boneless sofas look cozy, but they also sag really quickly. The cushions lose their shape, the fabrics start pilling, and the bulky size locks you into an awkward layout. And so what feels soft at first can become pretty lumpy within a matter of months. They limit your flexibility in a small apartment, swallow up more space than they should, and so it's the kind of purchase that just drains your budget because you have to replace it much sooner than you should. So what's the fix here? You should swap out your acrylic or metal pieces of furniture for more timeless wood and upholstered furniture because it's just a smarter investment. A wood dining set with cushioned seats instantly feels more solid and comfortable than flimsy clear chairs, while bar stools with fabric and back support are actually enjoyable to use on a daily basis. And the same thing goes for sofas. Choosing a wood frame design with well-structured cushions ages so much better than oversized trendy couches that just sag fast. And so these pieces prove that when you prioritize comfort and longevity, your apartment looks stylish now and still feels good years down the road. Now, another mistake people make is depending almost entirely on overhead lighting, which ends up flattening their entire space. In dining rooms, this usually shows up as a single pendant doing all the work. The table gets blasted with light, but the walls and the corners stay dim. And so instead of feeling warm, the room just feels uneven, as if the lighting was added last and never really fully thought through. And so that lighting fixture might look fine on its own, but it can't carry the entire space. And you see the same issue in open plan apartments that are filled with recessed ceiling lights. Everything is technically bright, but it still feels cold and empty. Because all the light comes from above, there's no softness at eye level, and nothing feels grounded. And even good furniture can start to feel flat when the lighting doesn't add any depth or warmth. And then in kitchens, if you've got a single ceiling globe like this one, it creates this harsh utilitarian feel. The counters get glare, the cabinets feel stark, and the room loses any sense of comfort. And so it does technically work for visibility, but it doesn't make the space feel inviting or lived in. And bedrooms are one of the worst offenders here, because having a single ceiling light might evenly light the bed, but it leaves the rest of the room feeling bare and impersonal. And without softer, lower light around the bed, the room never really shifts into that calm end-of-day mood that you'd actually want in your bedroom. But let me show you what's possible now in these 4 same rooms. Here in the dining room, once the lighting is layered, it feels completely different. The pendant is still there, but now it's just one part of the setup instead of the only source. The softer light from the sides fill in the walls and corners, which makes the space feel warmer and a lot more balanced. And the table still feels like the center of the room, but the room around it also feels alive. Now, in more open plan spaces, spreading the light out changes how the entire room feels. And instead of everything being lit from the ceiling, light now shows up at different heights, near the seating level, along the walls, and tucked into the corners. And that variation adds depth and softness, so the space feels calm and intentional rather than bright but empty. And the kitchen benefits from this shift just as much. With light coming from more than one place, the glare disappears and the room feels so much easier on the eyes. The counters are still practical and easy to use, but the space no longer feels harsh and purely functional. And it finally starts to feel like part of the home instead of a separate work zone, which is something that's really hard to picture without being able to visualize a few different lighting options side by side. And in the bedroom, this is where the difference is most obvious. The lower, warmer light near the bed immediately changes the mood of the room. The corners no longer fall away, and the space feels calm instead of stark. And so this is the kind of lighting that makes the room feel settled and restful. So if you want to be able to visualize your own home like this and see how different lighting setups change the mood of your room before you buy anything, I've also built a lighting tool, which is similar to the wallpaper one, that lets you do exactly that. You just upload a photo of your space and it'll give you back multiple lighting concepts so you can explore warmer, softer, or more layered options and see what actually works for your home. If that's something that you're interested in, the link is in the description. Now, the fourth mistake I see all the time is art in the wrong size or in the wrong place. For starters, art that's hung too high breaks the connection with the room. Here, the canvas is floating awkwardly above the sofa, which leaves too much empty wall space. And instead of tying the furniture and the wall together, it makes the art feel disconnected. And so even though I don't love this art piece specifically, at least placing it lower would help bring some more balance into this room. Then, art that's too small just looks lost against the wall. These three small pieces above the sofa don't hold enough visual weight for the size of this wall. And so the awkward scale here makes the room feel unfinished, almost as if these are placeholders instead of real art. But art that's in the wrong style can also clash with your room. And so here, having this bold, quirky photo sitting on top of the palm wallpaper just creates more chaos than good. Instead of blending in with the tropical vibe, it feels out of place and distracting. And so when art doesn't complement the wall or the furniture it's around, it actually fights the space instead of enhancing it. And a lot of people make this mistake, which is choosing generic art that just feels flat and strips the personality out of the room. So I'm specifically talking about mass-produced prints like this beige abstract set that don't add any real depth or story to the room. They might match your color scheme, but they end up looking bland and really impersonal. And without any character, the wall decor just feels more like filler than it does like design. But now I want to show you a couple outside-the-box examples of art that really nails it when it comes to scale, style, and placement in the room. So here, this green and orange tiger print works really well because it's the right size, it's placed at the right height, and its bold graphic style matches playful modern vibe of that kitchen. And the same goes here for these pink and yellow panels in the bedroom. They tie directly into the raw concrete and the geometric theme, but they're also perfectly scaled to the wall. And so both of these examples show that even if your art is more unusual like these pieces are, if it's done well, it feels like it belongs to the space and isn't just something that was randomly thrown on the wall. Now, the next mistake I see people making all the time is choosing the wrong scale of furniture and rugs. All right, so having a tiny rug in the living room just makes the entire setup feel disconnected and like the furniture is floating around it. The sofa and table here don't visually belong together because the rug isn't anchoring them together. And so instead of defining the seating zone, it looks like a random mat that was just dropped in the middle. And this leaves the room feeling unfinished and actually smaller than the room truly is. And having a rug like this one in the bedroom just has the same effect. It makes the bed and the side furniture feel ungrounded and out of scale. And honestly, this really just looks like a towel that someone laid on the floor. And so it's not providing anything to the room that it's not already getting from the rest of the furniture. It only covers a tiny patch of floor, so it doesn't add any warmth or visual weight. And instead of framing the bed as the centerpiece of the room, it just gets lost and looks accidental. And so the room here ends up feeling colder and less inviting. Now, similarly, having a sofa that's too small just leaves your living room feeling empty and underfurnished. And so the open floor just swallows it up and makes the proportions look off. And instead of creating a cozy gathering spot, the sofa looks like it was borrowed from a smaller room. And this makes the entire area feel sparse and awkwardly scaled. But at the same time, choosing too large of a sofa overwhelms the room and makes it feel cramped and heavy because the bulk of the sofa dominates the layout, which leaves very little breathing room for flow or balance. And instead of offering comfort, it just crowds the wall and the other pieces of furniture and makes the space feel overly dense. So how do you fix this? If you opt for multiple seating options, instead of forcing a big sofa into a tight room, you keep the space more balanced and flexible. And so a slim sofa like this one paired with an accent chair and an ottoman gives you enough seating without overwhelming the floor plan. And this kind of a mix makes the room feel light and airy instead of feeling cramped by one oversized piece. And if you can, choose a rug that fits the entire seating area and it'll completely transform how cohesive your room feels. Because when the rug is large enough to sit under every chair and table, it defines the living space as its own zone instead of just floating awkwardly. So now you know the mistakes you need to avoid so your home doesn't look all boring and blah. And the best way to do that is to have a clear structure behind every design decision you make, so you aren't just doing things willy-nilly. Watch this video next and I'll teach you a framework you can use to take even the most bland room in your home and turn it into something spectacular. You won't want to miss this one.